On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a woman walking her young child through a vacant lot in the Limert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles stopped when she saw something in the grass. At first, she thought it was a department store mannequin, something discarded, something fake. It was not a mannequin. What she had found was the body of a young woman, 22 years old, dark hair, pale skin. She had been posed, arranged deliberately, with her arms raised above her head, her legs straight, her body positioned precisely at the edge of the pavement, as if placed there to be found. Her face had been slashed at the corners of her mouth into a wide, permanent grin, and her body had been severed completely in two at the waist, drained entirely of blood, cleaned, and then put back together and laid in the grass, as if the killer wanted the world to see exactly what they had done. Her name was Elizabeth Short. The press would call her the Black Dahlia, and her murder, unsolved for over 75 years, remains the most notorious cold case in the history of Hollywood, in the history of America.
Before she was a case number, before she was a nickname, before she was a mystery, Elizabeth Short was a person. And that is the most important thing to hold on to throughout this story. She was born on July 29th, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters. Her father, Cleo Short, disappeared when she was 6, faking his own death to escape debt. He resurfaced years later. Elizabeth eventually reconnected with him briefly as a young adult. It did not go well. She was not well. She suffered from chronic respiratory problems throughout her childhood and was advised to spend winters in warmer climates. She drifted south and west, Florida, then California. She was charming, sociable, beautiful. She had a gift for making people feel seen. She dreamed of becoming an actress, as so many young women who came to Los Angeles in the 1940s did. As so many of them discovered, the dream and the city rarely matched.
By her early 20s, she was drifting between cheap rooming houses, taking waitressing jobs, accepting meals and kindness from men who wanted things in return. She was surviving, the way young women with no money and no family support survived in post-war Los Angeles. By charm, by presence, by staying in motion. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive was on January 9th, 1947, 6 days before her body was found. She was seen at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She walked out of the lobby, and then she disappeared into a city that was about to make her famous in the worst possible way.
The medical examiner's findings were unlike almost anything Los Angeles investigators had encountered. Elizabeth Short had been murdered elsewhere. There was no blood at the scene where she was found because she had been completely drained before being brought to the lot. The cause of death was hemorrhage and shock from cuts to the face. She had been alive at some point while this was being done to her. The bisection at the waist had been performed with surgical precision. Whoever did this knew human anatomy, knew how to cut, knew how to drain a body and clean it and move it without leaving traces. This was not a crime of rage or impulse. It had taken hours. It had required privacy, equipment, and knowledge. There were rope marks on her wrists and ankles. She had been restrained. There were signs that she had been kept somewhere, alive, for the 6 days between her last sighting and the discovery of her body. 6 days. What happened in those 6 days has never been established. LAPD launched one of the largest investigations in the department's history. Over 150 detectives were assigned at various points. More than 60 people confessed to the murder, all of them false confessions, all of them investigated and cleared. The case consumed the department for years and produced nothing. And then the killer made contact.
On January 24th, 1947, 9 days after the body was found, the Los Angeles Examiner received a package. Inside was a note, assembled from letters cut from newspaper headlines in the style of a ransom note. Letter to the Los Angeles Examiner, January 24th, 1947. Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow. Also inside the package, Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, her address book, and photographs of her with various men the police desperately wanted to identify. The items had been soaked in gasoline to destroy fingerprints. Whoever sent them was careful, deliberate. They wanted to taunt the investigation, wanted investigators to know they were being played with, without ever giving anything useful away. More letters followed, to the Examiner, to the Herald, to the police directly. Always cut and paste, always taunting. One read, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." Another promised to turn himself in. He never did. Forensic analysts examined every letter, every envelope. No fingerprints, no saliva on the stamps. He had wet them with water. The cutout letters came from multiple different newspapers and magazines, making the source impossible to trace. The letters eventually stopped. The case went cold. Elizabeth Short remained unidentified in death in every way that mattered. Her killer unknown, her final 6 days unaccounted for, her story buried under the nickname the press had given her, and the mythology that grew around it.
Over 75 years, over 500 suspects have been named in connection with the Black Dahlia murder. Here are the 4 most seriously investigated. Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician, jazz enthusiast, and friend of the surrealist artist Man Ray. His own son, retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel, spent years investigating him and wrote a book concluding that his father was the killer. George Hodel had the surgical knowledge the crime required. He lived near the crime scene. He was investigated by the LAPD at the time. Police actually bugged his home and recorded him saying in 1950, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." He fled to Asia shortly after. He died in 1999. He was never charged.
Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived 1 block from where the body was found. His daughter was a close friend of Elizabeth Short's sister. He had the surgical skills. He had the proximity. He was in the final stages of a neurological disease in January 1947 that may have caused radical personality changes. He died less than a year after the murder. His ex-wife's sister later claimed he had confessed to her. No physical evidence was ever found connecting him to the crime. Jack Anderson Wilson, a drifter and career criminal with a history of violence against women. An LAPD investigator named John Gilmore spent years building a case against Wilson, based largely on witness testimony from a woman who claimed Wilson had described the murder to her in detail. Wilson died in a hotel fire in 1982 before he could be formally questioned. Gilmore believed Wilson was the killer until his own death. The evidence was circumstantial.
Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner whose address was found in Elizabeth Short's belongings. She had lived at his home briefly. He was one of the men from her address book, found in the killer's package, that investigators most wanted to speak with. He was questioned repeatedly. He was never charged. He died in 1964, maintaining his innocence. The George Hodel theory is the most developed and the most seriously debated. His son, Steve, a trained detective, spent decades building the case, and the recorded statement from the LAPD surveillance is the closest thing to a near confession that exists in this case. But closest thing, too, is not a conviction, and George Hodel never stood trial.
The Black Dahlia case did not stay a murder investigation. It became something larger, a symbol, a mythology, a mirror held up to post-war Los Angeles and the dark side of the Hollywood dream. The press coverage at the time was relentless and often cruel. Reporters interviewed Elizabeth Short's acquaintances and published intimate details of her personal life, her relationships, her financial struggles, her reputation, in ways that blamed her implicitly for what had happened to her. The nickname Black Dahlia itself, glamorous, cinematic, turned a murdered woman into a character in a story about Los Angeles, rather than a story about her. Dozens of books have been written, films have been made. A James Ellroy novel and a Brian De Palma film both used her case as their foundation. The case has attracted more amateur investigators, armchair detectives, and competing theories than almost any other unsolved murder in American history. All of that attention, all of those decades, all of those investigators, professionals and amateurs alike. And still, nobody has been charged. Nobody has been tried. Nobody has ever formally answered for what happened to Elizabeth Short in those 6 missing days.
Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She had never appeared in a film. She had never gotten the life she came to Los Angeles to find. She became famous only after she was gone, and famous not for anything she did, but for what was done to her. She is buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. Her gravestone reads, Daughter, Elizabeth Short, July 29, 1924, January 15, 1947. Nothing else. No nickname, no mythology. Just a daughter. Just dates. Whoever killed her, whether it was George Hodel or Walter Bailey, or someone whose name has never appeared in any investigation, they have never faced justice. They lived their life, they died their death. And somewhere in the gap between Elizabeth Short walking out of the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th, 1947, and her body being found 6 days later, the truth is still waiting to be found. Who do you think did it? Is the George Hodel theory convincing? Or do you think the real answer is still out there in a file nobody has looked at closely enough? Leave your theory below. And if you want more cases like this one, cases that Hollywood couldn't solve even when they tried, subscribe.